Former Office of Hawaiian Affairs trustee Peter Poe recently published a commentary in Civil Beat. The commentary begins by explaining that the Canadian Astronomical Society, a Mauna Kea 30-meter telescope partner, recently announced that they cannot support moving forward without the consent of the Native Hawaiian community. While claiming to set aside 30-meter telescope politics, Poe criticized the Society's announcement by stating, had they studied the Hawaii experience more closely, they would have found that defining what and who constitutes a Hawaiian or the Hawaiian community is far more complicated than genealogical ancestry. Poe concluded his commentary with, I pray the day will come when every citizen who calls Hawaii home can proudly stand and declare, I am Hawaiian. This is an interesting way to conclude his commentary.
Aloha!
We've been living in Hawaii for just about 3 years now.
And others have also recently commented negatively about the Society's announcement. Poe's commentary raises an important question. Why did the Canadian Astronomical Society announce that it could not support the TMT unless it has the consent of Native Hawaiians? This video answers that question by first asking, what's up with Canada? What's FPIC? And what's Canada and FPIC got to do with Hawaii and Native Hawaiians? Share your manao on this in the comments below and check out the description also below for relevant links and other information. What's up with Canada?
It was a huge disappointment that a few countries, a few states, had voted against the declaration. 4 countries, only 4, but 4 significant ones. The United States among them.
While Canada was among 4 states that voted against the United Nations Declaration in 2007, since then, Canadian provincial governments and the national government have made efforts to incorporate the Declaration into its laws.
It is Canada's intention to remove our permanent objector status and become a full supporter of the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Canada is working to implement the UN Declaration through Bill C-15.
Can you tell us a bit about what this bill is?
Well, the federal bill, which was rolled out last week, is complementary to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which was passed in 2007 by the General Assembly there. And Canada has been kind of hemming and hawing about it ever since. And it's basically, the rights of Indigenous people are hereby recognized. We recognize the right to self-determination. We will consult with you on any changes that have to be made.
Good morning, Chief Justices.
In 2021, the Canada Supreme Court also recognized the human rights of Indigenous people in Washington State to access resources in Canada. In this case, Canada's highest court acknowledged that even though an Indigenous community was forced out of Canada and into Washington State, that Indigenous community still had rights to the lands they traditionally hunted on within Canada. While the court based its decision on Canadian law, it is consistent with the UN Declaration. The Canadian Astronomical Society's announcement that it cannot support the 30-meter telescope unless it has the consent of Native Hawaiians is in line with the Indigenous human rights developments happening in Canada. Michael Ballo, the chair of the Society's advisory committee, according to the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, explained, Canada signed on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that requires the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous communities for projects on their traditional territories. What's FPIC? The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Article 32 requires states to consult and operate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral, water, or other resources. In summary, FPIC refers to a consultation process that is free of coercion and pressure, conducted prior to any action or development project affecting Indigenous peoples is undertaken, informative so Indigenous communities know projects' scopes and effects on their lives, cultures, and resources. These elements are required for consent. It's important to emphasize that the UN Declaration specifically states that consultation with Indigenous peoples is through their own representative institutions. What does Canada and FPIC have to do with Hawaii and Native Hawaiians? What's happening in Canada regarding the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the importance of Indigenous peoples' free, prior, and informed consent generally is important here for two main reasons. First, it should be clear now who the Canadian Astronomical Society referred to when it said it cannot support the 30-meter telescope unless it has the consent of Native Hawaiians. Indigenous peoples' consent does not refer simply to anyone calling Hawaii home.
So we were on Zillow actually looking for a second home in Tahoe,
Yeah, and then randomly, somehow we landed on
Hawaii. And we're in Hawaii. We have a house in Maui. We're moving to Maui.
We are.
I just moved to the North Shore of Oahu, seriously, only 5 days ago with my husband.
Second, while one individual responded to the Star Advertiser that the community has already consented to the TMT through the democratic political process, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples requires states to, again, consult and operate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources. This means there needs to be a process completely separate from State of Hawaii Board of Land and Natural Resources meetings, hearings, and processes, as well as state legislative processes. More simply, the democratic political process is not enough to obtain Native Hawaiians' free, prior, and informed consent.
Members, there are 80 in opposition and 7 in support.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is adopted.
So why did the Canadian Astronomical Society announce that it could not support the 30-meter telescope unless it has the consent of Native Hawaiians? It's quite simple. The Society realizes that state law processes are not sufficient and that there are important human rights issues involved. And it's quite possible also that the Canadian Astronomical Society does not want to be viewed as a human rights violator. Mahalo for watching. Subscribe so you can find out about upcoming videos, and feel free to leave comments below.